Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Punaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So these verses from 46 to 49 are talking about the spiritual disciplines with respect to our svardharmic nature. When we think about svardharma, which these next few verses are going to be talking about, it's very easy not to do svardharmic nature because get on to what we are innately about, because there's so many things which come into play in our lives of what we may feel are our obligations or things life consumes our time. But if one is able to focus on this value of svardharma, it just actually enables you to free up time to do those obligations which perhaps, having gone along your path, you realize maybe aren't what you're supposed to be doing, or they are part of a parcel. So it actually enables you to discipline and divide up your time. Paradharma, as we were talking about last week, alien nature, causes so much friction or agitation in one's mind as a matter of course. It's almost like you're catching up to try and do what you ought to do, but all the energies get dissipated. So if you were to think, we've got 3 questions here of svardharma, I just noted, but if you were to think about what kind of feeling or attitude paradharma and svardharma promote in you, I mean, if I'm to ask you that question, what comes to your mind? Provided we've all understood what is svardharma. Maybe that's one of the questions. First question, what is svardharma? Anyone? Gita.
It's things that we naturally orient towards, something that we take naturally to. So, for example, an artist, he or she takes up to art, creative art, very naturally. So, when we identify children and they say, oh, she's a genius or she's a born genius, it's probably that's their svardharma, that's their innate tendency to go, gravitate towards something artistic, something creative. It's that innate quality in one that we define as svardharma. And it also depends on one's own gunas as well. The three gunas, which is the sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic gunas.
How does it depend on one gunas? What does that mean? It doesn't have to be you, it could be anybody who replies. Anyone? Does it, doesn't it? Guna, sattva, rajas, tamas.
I'll start the conversation, perhaps. I think somebody who's like very rajasic, who's predominantly rajasic, would take up to careers or activities that are more action oriented. So he or she might decide to enroll in the forces, in the armed forces or the Royal, the Navy, and do action that way because they get immense satisfaction physically acting and physically being involved. Whereas somebody who is very tamasic is going to be a couch potato sitting on their sofas and expecting everything to be done to them, or struggling to act. A sattvic person would normally gravitate towards learning, more reflection, more introvert behaviors. So they would take up to perhaps even teaching and similar activities.
Okay. Anybody else wants to add or has any question on that? Sam?
I was just going to perhaps I'm just wondering, even if someone is a tamasika person, it makes me wonder whether they might still orient towards something more naturally than some others, than something else. But because of their perhaps, laziness or, like qualities, they may not pursue that. It's just I'm just wondering or asking everybody what others think. I don't know.
What does anybody think? So could that be true? Yeah, it could be true. You may have a innate tendency, perhaps for whatever reason your environment doesn't promote that, or you've got some thing which is some anxiety or worry on something, so you're sapping your energy, not allowing yourself to go for that tendency. So the gunas help you escalate whatever your trait is or not. And you may go towards something because of your gunas, and it may match up with your svardharmic nature. Or you may have to run through a course of activity in order to find out really what you're about. Because sometimes you may have, as you pointed out, Sam, you may not be able to, you may be like Dhammasik, you may not be able to pursue what your nature is for whatever the reasons are which are holding you back. But you build up your momentum, if you remember in karma or action, you build up your momentum first, maybe not knowing whatever you're supposed to do. But from that momentum, you get a discretion or discrimination. You get a feeling, I'm not supposed to be doing this. When you've pursued it, or there's a feeling, this feels innately right for me to be doing. Why didn't I think about it before? But because one didn't have the momentum of activity, one wasn't able to think it through because there's a lot of desires going on, at that stage. That if you've got few desires, you may not have to go through that momentum of heavy action. You may be able to think it through and then act. But the tendency is you've got to build up the momentum, that rajas, to actually assess what your svardharmic nature is in this climate anyway. If you're sitting quietly, if you've got a routine, an ashram routine actually helps you sift out very quickly what you're supposed to be doing or not, because it's so structured, catering to your karma, bhakti, and jnana. And you will quickly find out if you've got that capacity to think, sit and think and reflect and then act, or whether you need to act first and then think and reflect. There's a whole schedule's designed like that. But if you're not in that sort of environment, it's more rajasic, you may need to go through more of a momentum. And depending on you and your environment, you can cultivate different a system. So the gunas have a bearing on it, but it doesn't determine if you're a particular nature meaning if you have a particular vocation. It might speed it up or slow it down. It might make you fulfill it quicker or so you can move on to the next, but it doesn't determine directly what your guna, what your svardhama is. It helps you. What else? So the reason this is really important, can anybody think why to know your svardhama is really important? On the individual and the global stage.
Enable our journey towards finding the truth or whatever it is that we are looking for, purpose of life, reduce the mental agitations. This paradharma creates lots of mental agitations. There's that constant unhappiness or discontent.
Mm-hmm. So what does constant unhappiness and discontent cause?
If you're pursuing your svardhama, then it just assists in removing vasanas because you're not agitated in other areas. You can concentrate on that path of removing vasanas. Whereas if you're doing paradharma, presumably the opposite happens, you accumulate more.
So there's always a lacuna left. You might actually accumulate more and use a lot of props to fix up your feeling satiated, but without those props, it goes back. It doesn't make you internally independent. So you're always relying on outside to fix you. And svardharma, I don't know if you ever, when you're doing something innately, which is your tendency, time goes, the focus is sharp, there's something moment to moment settled in your mind, and it really pushes you forward in your thinking. So you can have a different, bigger perspective in things. It doesn't keep you just on that individual. If it's a spiritual sadhana, it won't keep you individually self-centered. It branches out. Anybody, anything more before we move to the verse?
At the weekend, a famous footballer from the 1960s died. His name was Bobby Charlton. He made his name in the World Cup of 1966. Different generation to many of us. But he famously was quoted that about why he was a footballer. He said he found it so easy. It was just so natural to him. He couldn't even understand why anyone else found football difficult. And I think that's an expression of a svardhamic nature. He found very early what was his svardhama.
Yes. So if you have the privilege to know earlier on, can help you go through it very life easily. Also, if that's not your only aspect of svardharmic nature, you can pass through that and go on to the next. You sometimes may have more than one svardharmic nature. Not many, a few times you might change in your life to help you on your path, but you move with that faster and smoother. And hey, when somebody says something's easy, it's like, yeah, definitely that way.
What do you do when you can't, when you're unable to pursue your svardharmic nature? What can you, how do you handle?
So the first thing is you've got to assess what is your svardharmic nature. So you've got to take the time out to assess it over a period of maybe, if you don't know, maybe a month or two, just if it needs that, just going through what are the things that you are inclined to do, you like. Just note it on a piece of paper, put it aside, look at it again at the end of the month. Put a paper there every day of what really is your value. Don't look at it, only look at it at the end, what's recurring. So you're getting an idea or making a mental observation of what you're about. So you've got to observe that initially. Then your question is, what if you can't do what you think your svardharmic nature is? You either suffer it or you make an intentional choice, excuse me, to maneuver yourself to have a slot, you discipline it, to a slot of time which nobody can take. You might not be able to pursue it all day long. It's a privilege to do that. But you might be able to carve out a time in your day, which if you're consistent, if you've got many different obligations, if you're consistent, you won't let anybody else have that time. And you will then pursue whatever your nature is in that time. So at least perhaps the package you've got in life isn't what you quite want anymore, but at least you've got that carved out to actually level off your mind's agitations so you can actually grow in your own courage and confidence, your conviction, to actually pursue what it is that you feel you need to in that time span. And you've carved it out. And in whatever you have to do otherwise, make it intentional. I'm doing this because I want to do that. So it's a slow process if you're in a rut. But if you know you've got to carve out time, it's contrary to spiritual ordinance not to. So if you're on a spiritual path, you understand it. And if I know that's what I've got to do, discipline your time. There's always a part of a day, which I believe might have been a William Blake quote, you might correct me, Tim, that Satan cannot take, that you're somebody else, all the worldly things, where you can keep sacred. Who gets up at 4 to 6? Nobody can take that time from you. If you're really disciplined and you want something, I would suggest this type of spiritual study. But if your svardharma is so strong, you're not getting any time, use that time to do when nobody can take that time. Or any time somebody comes to interfere with that time, you politely say, no, that's not possible. This is possible. You have to really discipline it. Sorry, I can't do that. If anybody asks me for time, sometimes people in the past have asked, can we have a class at 6 or something like that? I just think, no way, Jose. That's time for me to reflect and study. In the morning, that's time for me to get on to my exercises, XYZ. Otherwise, what good am I to anybody if I can't even do my svardharmic nature? So it helps you in that. So I hope that's helpful, Jyoti. You've got to grab
Yeah,
that time
thank
for
you.
you. Nobody on your spiritual path, nobody's got the right to take it from you. Discipline it,
Yeah.
carve it out, take it. Because if it's
Thank you
truly,
very much.
if it's truly svardhama, you'll be in your svardhama, you will be gradually tailoring it to being unselfish, selfless. Spiritual development will happen, and you'll be putting back in your world because you can. There's a chat. What was the chat? Somebody in the chat.
I put the William Blake quote. His quote about svardhama.
There is a moment in each day that Satan cannot find. Oh, can this watcher friend find it? But the industrious find. Thanks, good. Maybe you can put that on the WhatsApp too. Let's go. Is there any question before we move? Okay, let's go. 47.
Prehyan swadharmo vigunaha paradharma tanustithat swabhavaniyatam karma kuruvannapnoti kilbisham.
Okay. Peter, if you could read the verse. Thank you.
Better is svardhama, one's duty, though without merit, than paradharma, duty of another well performed. Performing action ordained by one's nature, one incurs no sin.
So what we've been talking about is just reiterating here. So better to go through svardharma, though it may not be conducive to do it sometimes. So you may have a distinct trait, but not the environment to do whatever you've got to do in a sense. You still got to do it. Or you may, say for instance, it may be environment, or it may be, well, circumstance, scenario. You still got to do it. I think we answered the question, why you've got to do it. And it's putting here, though paradharmic activities, it's better to do svardharmic activities without merit, and paradharmic activities may be performed well. Now, how can that happen? How can that happen? Can anybody think what the scenario is?
And activities which give instant pleasures may be seen as successful, but in the long run actually causes harm. I think we saw this in 36, 37, I think. That which is bitter is better, and that which is good is bitter later.
So Rajasic or Sattvic happiness. So what's the basis of that? So, you're saying what practically when we might do better, when might we be encouraged or want to do or get into paradharmic activity, Peter?
Well, clearly there will be a clash for nearly everyone in how society values a particular work practice and how one individually practices it, and society values it. And, that's reflected in one's wages. And often it's not possible to work for a low wage you want to do.
Correct. It takes, exactly. So not possible because maybe you've got different commitments. Society values mostly your successes on perhaps the material, currency-wise. Perhaps your parents have encouraged you most Indian parents might encourage them to be certain professions. Rare indeed is it the other way, or others too, parents. Rare is it that you are something out of the general norm, for different reasons, because society values the material. And to fit into society, you may have to fit certain norms. So you get busy, not living, but gaining all those possessions, which take your mind off certain things. And also certain family commitments can take you off. So paradharmic activity could be very normal in the society. Here he's saying, even if it's not with merit, do the svardharmic activity. Merit meaning in the worldly sense, like it may not be considered that you're successful in the material. Actually, I do remember, I can vouch for myself, I was never ever pushed into, I was very fortunate being the youngest child, I can say. I was never pushed into doing a profession. My siblings were different than me in that sense. And in the sense, I pursued a career prior to this in the arts, very svardharmic. I was doing it since a child. I didn't even have to put any effort into it, to be honest. Now, when it came to actually the material side of it, it took me a long time to see my family friends who were all creating lots of material wealth, to realize, though I knew it in my heart of hearts, to realize what I'm doing is really important. It took me some time, a long time, to, though I knew it in my heart, but when you're put up against that society who are going in a particular direction, you have to have your wits about you to actually understand what you're doing is your sadhana. I didn't know it was sadhana at the time, but important for growth. And that it was a way of offering back, because it often seems self-interest. It took a long time to shift that view. So that's, even when you know and you get opportunity, it's difficult to conceive with the pressure of the environment until you're steadfast with your own thoughts and confident. So you've got to pursue it long enough and analyze it to think, why am I doing this? So even, you see, the merit seems as though it's not worthwhile because it's measured against currency. But when you actually measure it in a different context and you've got that peace of mind, you see it's far better to do it that way. I can tell you that's my experience. So paradharmic activities. So I was in a privileged position that I could do that at the time. But you have to work on it, whoever you are. Paradharmic activities, what does he say? Well performed. Performing actions ordained by one's nature incur no sin. Why might something well performed incur sin? If it's well performed and not something with no merit, what are we talking about here? Just elaborating further than what we have.
Perhaps it's to do with integrity, because if you're approaching a task for purely material reasons, but you don't actually like what you're doing, you lose some personal integrity. So I think it means sin in the context of being morally consistent.
So if you lose that personal integrity of what you believe in, it might be that you have everything around you in every possession. You may even have community around you, but you're not at peace. Just keep niggling. It doesn't burn the vasanas. So that's really the important thing. So in today's society, we're pushed to perform activities. And there's nothing wrong in earning a living or the monetary side of it. There's nothing wrong with by far. This knowledge doesn't exempt you. Actually, it's supposed to cultivate it if you understand the strategy properly. But you can't depend upon that alone. You've got to have that integrity, those internal values to stand up on. Otherwise, you'd be hurting from inside. Something will bother you. It doesn't matter what you have in life. Let's read it.
Dharma is the nature of an individual, composed of vasanas, inherent tendencies. Every person is born with his vasanas. They manifest as his distinct nature, introvert or extrovert, mathematics or music, business or profession. Svardhama means one's own nature, and paradharma, alien nature. In determining life's career, it is important that one chooses a field of activity according to svardhama and not paradharma. A person pursuing his svardhama will ultimately find peace and prosperity in life. Svardharmika activity produces no regret, no mental agitation, no sin. It is a course of life best suited for evolution, for the elimination of vasanas. Svardharmika activity, therefore, is preferable even if his achievement falls short of merit in that field. Paradharmika activity, though well accomplished, works against his basic nature, would leave him to frustration, mental agitation, a sinful life, acquiring more vasanas instead of exhausting them. This verse is virtually a repetition of verse 35 in chapter 3. The first lines are exactly the same. The second lines differ a little. Therein, the second line denounces paradharmika activity as dreadful. That it would be better even to die in svardharmika activity than to take up anything paradharmika. The second line of this verse here points the consequence passively. By performing svardharmika action, one incurs no sin.
So just a little bit more subtle. So it's as well to know that at whatever stage, if you can home in onto looking at what your innate bent is, your vocation is about. There'll come a stage in your own spiritual journey where it doesn't really matter because you've got that fluid flow in your own svardharmic nature. So you can actually afford to do things which are not svardharmic because they come as the package. But you have to evolve that. So it really might not matter because it's all leading to the same cause. But that's with a comprehension and understanding. When you've actually refined your svardharmic nature to some degree, that you're not dependent upon, you've got time for things to be in different avenues because it's all going to the same place. So generally that's when your svardharmic nature is purely on your spiritual evolution. Everything else can be or not be. It's just for a particular purpose and cause. It generally falls into place anyway. But you can be, if there's a cause, we're all acting together for something and somebody falls short, we can all go and help them to make sure that that aspect of the cause collectively is uplifted. You might say it's not my svardharma to do that. But it is actually in terms of your spiritual evolution to be collective. So it becomes part of that as you refine it. It becomes part of your obligation. You feel you want to. So it may not be, you may be, your role may be one or the other, but you can go in and out because you're all serving a purpose. It really doesn't matter. You see what's required and needed and you do it. Let's go. Yes.
So paradharma is a society definition and svardhama is an individual definition in some sense. My question is, we all distinguish each other from each other. And are we looking at people's svardhama? Is that what, when we see one person as different from another, are we looking at their svardhama?
You're looking at their gunas. In actual fact, you're looking at your own gunas reflected there. You might see somebody, they may have not expressed their svardharma as far as they're concerned or you're concerned, we don't know. But you see something in them, rajasic, tamasic, sattvic, or whatever, in your own reflection. It may not even be even measurement in some sense, but you impose that in some sense. But maybe, you know, if somebody's really flourishing, you recognize it because they've created that environment for you to see it. If it's not, they may have a dormant svardharma and you don't even know it because they're so full of their anxieties and stresses that they can't even maneuver. So, you know, it may have got suppressed in some format or another. You can't even see it. So you can't judge that person that not having a particular svardharma just because everything else is pushed down. So society has a collective imposition, or the mahat can influence you to the extent that you haven't carved out your own nature. The mahat will influence you how it wants you to go, that force. But once you've carved out your own nature of who you are, you can fit into that mahat, but you never lose sight of what you're what you're heading for, gunning for. You know, you're on the spiritual path. You can be put in anywhere and you will still be on that path. You have a tendency of being analytical. You will be that anywhere. You'll go into different environments or different cultures, and you'll be able to pick out the same thought process or same thinking there and amplify that, rather than dumb it down if you're confident. Otherwise, if you're not, you'll dumb it down and say that, you know, what's happening. That paradharmic activity creates difference. The svardharmic activity, when it starts to be in a spiritual pursuit, not just a vocational for a material pursuit, enables you to create unity. As you don't if it's your svardharma is purely for material, it will create differences. But if it's for something more universal or spiritual, you'll bring a unity with people.
Can I just ask, in the context of the narrative in the Gita, what clearly Krishna is directing Arjuna to get back on his svardharma, but in this, in terms of reference to paradharma, what would you say is influencing or pushing Arjuna away from the behavior he should be doing?
So Arjuna's vocation is a Kshatriya, as we recognize, and he has got into this battle and he's never lost a battle in his life. He's Kshatriya, a warrior in that sense of fighting battles. That's his nature. It's not meaning everybody else's nature. It's like that's his particular nature. And on the battlefield, at the 11th hour, when he's got prepared and everything, and he sees his kinsman in an emotional mess. So this battle didn't come without lots of negotiation and lots of whether we should or we shouldn't. It only came to that level because of there was no other way. But not before that. And it's just a metaphor, remember. But for Arjuna, in this context, as a Kshatriya, he's dropped everything, and he's making excuses that it's better not to fight for a bigger cause. Because the bigger cause is that I cannot physically kill. It's a very, very rare and intricate, more detail is there than just saying, right, we should all go and fight and create wars. It's not like that. There's a lot more to it than that. But in Arjuna's case, he's a Kshatriya. He's become emotional because he's seen his guru, he's seen his grandsire, he's seen all his relatives. Even he's seen Duryodhana, who has done him endless wrong, that he feels, oh my gosh, I can't kill him. Because he's made it all personal and said, I will incur sin and agitation. I will be doing the wrong thing because I'll have my blood on my hands if I fight. What he's not realizing, if he doesn't do it, there will be a lot more bloodshed and there will be a lot more lower value, as he's not prepared to uphold the bigger value. So he's not following his svardharmic nature in that case, because that's what he's designed to do. So in that case, he's falling short. For him only. If you're not a Kshatriya, you don't need to be getting into that. So one has to assess for you, what must you do in the whole of things for your bigger cause? And it's just a play on, the metaphor is a play on your negative tendencies and your positive tendencies. How do I overcome the negative? By increasing the volume of positive, and the volume of positive values in me allows me to actually be objective, to not be a part of either of those. So that sort of svardharma pushes that on faster. You know, if you've ever done something when you are very intensely focused and you know that's your svardharmic nature, you get lost in it and you're very acutely aware of what you're doing. You can also stand back, and if it falls apart, you don't worry about it, you just move on because you know you're pursuing svardharma, something evolving you. Arjuna hasn't felt that when he's dropped his bow and arrow. That's why it's paradharmic for him. And he's a man of action. If you're a thinker, hopefully you wouldn't get into it. Just wouldn't get into it. Got a better method of going around it. You can see the bigger picture a different way. He's not a thinker, he's an actor. And deliberately in that field. I don't know if that makes sense. So.
I mean, when you just said that he's not a thinker, he's more of an action person. I guess it just made me wonder whether he has a proportion of the thinking element and the action, just because perhaps by nature some people are more driven to act than think. And I know you don't mean that, you know, that's not the right thing. I know, I know that you don't mean that he's not the right person, but yeah, no, I mean, that just ran through my head that you don't necessarily need to be a thinker, and of course it helps, you know, but yeah.
I think all it means is a thinker's activities are more pervasive than if you act on it straight away. So it's better to have a strategy to do something rather than go through it and then learn the strategy and think, now I should do it this way. That's all. That's what it does. It's also, if you've got a lot of vasanas, You may not have the ability to sit and think because your mind's so heavy with thoughts propelling you to those desires to act that you can't stop yourself. But as you've gone through that mass, it calms you down. And then you can actually step back and think, okay. So for the next time round, you may act on your thinking. Okay, I've experienced this before, or I've read and reflected on this. I've drawn it out of myself. And maybe I think about this and then act. Or maybe I instantaneously are more using my intellect, more discriminate, because I understand how this goes, instead of rushing in and then finding out.
Yeah, I guess.
So
Sorry, go ahead.
Arjuna's not all he can't be all a person of action. He must have, he's a Kshatriya, he's got a certain amount of sattva in him. So, and they all did, and that was the whole thing. So he can think on bigger values. It's just he's starting to think on the battlefield. It's the wrong place to think. He's not smart enough to have thought, I should have thought about this before.
But I think everyone in that situation would be like Arjuna, like, because your mind hasn't developed for you to think like that. You might need to be taught by a teacher, a guru, or you might be guided. In this case, Arjuna is being guided by Krishna. And I think that sometimes many of us, if not all of us, will learn through experience, because we might not think, and we might just be driven by, as you said, by our desires. And I think human being is capable of that, is prone to that. And then we learn through experience. Like I might have, for example, been ran by my ego, and then I made the mistake, and then I realized, oh shoot, like, but perhaps that was the greatest lesson. I needed to have gone through that action experience in order to be able to then learn from that. So I think, I don't know, because it just made me wonder when you said, oh, he's not a thinker. I'm just wondering.
In that sense, he's not he can't sit and think and look for the whole. He needs to act for the whole. Predominance is that. So you're right, we're all Arjunas. We've all got to act on whatever we've got. But it sure does help if you've thought about it beforehand. So if you can put yourself in a capacity to have that knowledge and understanding, you may perhaps do it differently. And so the knowledge is actually offering us something to draw out of ourselves. There's a saying, fools learn from experience, wise learn from others. So we have that choice of action to educate ourselves, however, be it teacher, book, guru, yourself, in your own thinking. We have that capacity given to us, that buddhi, that intellect to refine ourselves. It's up to us whether we can and what we choose to or not to. Generally, action comes heavy and thick first because we haven't got that capacity. So if we had that capacity to think, many things don't have to happen, and we can think on something better to happen. That's all. So it's giving us that possibility. It's not saying that we're all in that predicament. It's saying you can refine that. This Bhagavad Gita is deliberately designed for a person of action to start upping their thinking. Some of the Upanishads or other texts are not designed for people of action. They can't even think below unselfish or selfless action. They don't understand in the Upanishad what it is to be selfish. It's like level of sattva that they're talking. It's like they don't understand those people who are selfish. They can't understand it the way that it's written. Whereas this is very much understanding that there is a nature in us which is self-centered or selfish, and how we can up it. And part of it's through your karma, bhakti, your identification. Jnana backs your karma, enables you to identify we're all human beings, we're not X or Y. To live up to the dignity of that, we all got to create. This is why svardhama is important. If you're feeling much better about yourself in doing what your vocation is, you're likely to be much better to others and link up with others. If you're feeling agitated and stressed, there's no room for you to serve others. You're so stressed out yourself, you can't think of anybody else. It makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does make sense. Thank you. I guess I was just thinking from the perspective that, like, when I learned about Arjuna, that, you know, he's fearful, he doesn't want to fight because he's fearful of fight and killing his people and causing the drama and all that. And I guess I put myself in that situation that maybe I would act the same too. Maybe I'm trying to come up with excuses to Krishna to say, oh, I don't want to fight because I'm fearful. Like, what if I die, or what if I kill, and all that. But then it takes time for you to learn. And I think that's what Krishna is doing with Arjuna. He's imparting the knowledge slowly to elevate his consciousness as to why he should, quote unquote, fight. And perhaps that can be with many to think like that. So thank you for illuminating that.
Some of this is a repetition. We're on chapter 18, and he quite rightly pointed out in chapter 3, the same verses there, slightly different, because we forget, because we're involved in our own worlds of whatever. It's just a reminder. Yeah, you're right. It's for us to think on. Let's go. 48.
Sahajam karma kaunteya sadosamapi na tyajet sarvaram pahi doshena dhumena vritaha.
Sam, if you could read the verse.
The action born with oneself, O Kunteya, though faulty, one should not relinquish, for all undertakings are fault-ridden as fire by smoke.
So if we understand faulty by who is by everybody else's measurement rather than what you really feel you ought to be doing. So he's just repeating, don't relinquish svardhamic activity, or any action for that fact, even if you don't know what svardhamic activity is. Don't what's the word? Don't pass off your work. Do it yourself. If you can help somebody, help them. So if it's svardhamic, even better so. So all actions from the absolute point of view are considered dosha. Dosha means evil, negative. But relatively speaking, if all our actions are like that, svardhamic actions too have got an element of negativity in them. So what can you do about it? You can evolve your activities so that they are actionlessness. They have a quality of actionlessness. What does that mean? We've used this word before in chapter 3 and various. What do we mean by actionlessness? Drop the action. What do we mean by that? Actionlessness takes us to perfection. So what do we mean by actionlessness? Tim?
I guess you're suggesting that one should not be concerned with the fruit of the action.
That's one aspect. And what's the other aspect, which was at the beginning of this chapter?
Is it like you are doing your actions automatically, that it's actionlessness? It's like brushing your teeth or just things that are part of your nature. And yeah, it's just part of your nature that you don't feel it is action at all. It is just actionless, but you are doing the action.
Yeah, That's an element of it. What else?
You're doing action for the sake of action, not because of your whims and fancies, not because of your desires, because that's what you ought to do, not what you want to do. So you're removing the emotions and the bondage from the action and doing because that's your duty, call of duty.
Okay. So you've removed the fruit, you do things on obligation. So you've got to figure out what your obligation is, your svardhama nature. So it feels second nature. What else? What else is an element to make it action? Tim?
Well, it's renunciation in action. You're got a higher goal.
You're at a higher goal. Anything else? What else comes into play that actually disrupts you? So looking for the fruit of action, the result can impoverish your activity. If you've got your obligation in place, a higher value or goal or aspiration, that can fuel your activity in a direction, give you a momentum. If you do it as for its sake, so you're not focused on that result, you're also not focused on the desire per se, the backdrop of that ego. Remember, the sannyasi is that. The tyagi is one who drops the fruit. The sannyasis drop the backlog of the desires, just acting on what they're about for that high purpose. So it's all to do with using subtle intellect as you refine it. It might be a worldly thing to begin with, but slowly that svardharmic nature tunes you into your subtle intellect. So for its sake, you just know, you feel like the instrument. You just know that that's what's got to be done, you do it. You're actually nothing to do with it. Actionlessness, selfless. You're not even doing it for the society, you just know it's got to be done. And incidentally, it benefits the society. You know that will be it. So actionlessness. He mentions here in this verse something about fire and smoke. So we were talking a moment ago about if all actions are dosha, evil, have got an evil, you want to make it actionlessness. So you're just doing it for a sake, because you've got to get rid of your vasanas, resolve it, elevate it, refine it. So they're not harassing you with worry or anxiety. So this idea of smoke, what does it say? So actions born of oneself or conveyor through, though faulty, should not be relinquished. So if your svardharmic nature isn't coming out as the best, you keep going with it, because it will eventually come right. So it's like smoke and fire. There will be smoke in the beginning, but the smoke will go once you start getting on. The fire's burning bright, when the smoke will disappear. So when you've got onto your actions in an actionless manner, it starts moving. It's burning bright. It's a strong force. The smoke is gone. It's not whimpering anymore. And you start burning up vasanas. As a matter of fact, because you really got that momentum on that. As by fire, by smoke, it says. It's we're finished. We'll read the commentary next week.
Thank you.
You have a good week, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.